It seems to be a dying form of communication. How many of you have at some point in your life received a picture postcard from someone? How many of you? A lot of people aren't raising their hands. Our daughter Bethany has gotten in the habit of sending us a picture postcard when they go on vacation. The way that the Postal Service is now, especially with postcards, usually it's about 2 weeks after they get home that something will show up from wherever. About 2 weeks ago, they went to Arizona, went to the Grand Canyon in Sedona. So I don't know if we're going to get an Arizona postcard this week or not. We'll see. They're safely home, though. But it's always fun to get it. A picture postcard, it usually has some tourist destination. Maybe it's a natural wonder or a building or a monument, something of that sort. And then on the other side, it has a little place. And it's not very big because you got to put the address on the other side, right? Just a room for a brief note to send to family, to send to friends. And usually it'll say something like this: having a great time, wish you were here, see you soon. Something like that. Now, I don't know about you, but when I get a postcard, there's a couple of reactions I have. The first one is, I'm glad they got to get away. I hope they enjoy themselves. And the second thing is, man, I wish I could be there too. Right? But I've never received a postcard quite like the one that David sends here in Psalm 61. He's in an exotic place of some sort, at least that's what he tells us, but he's not at all having a good time. In fact, he's crying out. He's crying out to God for help. But there's one good thing you got to say. In the middle of this despair that he's feeling, this sense of being in a faraway place, he doesn't give in to despair. He doesn't give in to despair because he knows in his heart of hearts that help is on the way. Help is on the way. I share this psalm with you this morning over a year into this pandemic because every single one of us, I guarantee it, is exhausted at some level. Every single one of us at some level. We're exhausted with the precautions. We're exhausted with the worries. We're exhausted with the struggles. And maybe for you and your family, you're exhausted with the losses of this last 18 months. And you wonder, is it ever going to end? Are things ever going to get back to normal? Well, we can't talk about normal, but we can talk about what David leans upon in his postcard from the ends of the earth. Even if you feel like you're at the end of your rope today, hang on and know that God is with you. So let's look here in Psalm 61 at what he says to us this morning. He writes, "Hear my cry, O God. Listen to my prayer. From the ends of the earth I call to you. I call as my heart grows faint. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. For you have been my refuge, a strong tower against the foe. I long to dwell in your tent forever and take refuge in the shelter of your wings. For you, God, have heard my vows. You have given me the heritage of those who fear your name. Increase the days of the king's life, his years for many generations. May he be enthroned in God's presence forever. Appoint your love and faithfulness to protect him. Then I will ever sing in praise of your name and fulfill my vows day after day." Now, let me hasten to say, first of all, as we read this passage, that we need to decide and we need to recognize these are a warrior's words. These are a warrior's words. If you know nothing about David's story and you jump in right here at Psalm 61, you might judge that he's a wimp and not a real man. Because these things make him sound weak. He's confessing his weakness. They don't fit the usual image of a self-sufficient, strong man. But David is the model of a strong and faithful man. He's the fellow who, as a teenager, went out on a battlefield when all the army of Israel was hiding behind their shields. When that giant Goliath came out and issued his daily charge. Someone, just one man, come out and fight me. Let's just settle this between the Philistines and the Israelites right here. And all those men, their knees were knocking together. And here's David, the teenager, going out and saying, who's standing up and declaring his rebellion against God? And he took his shepherd's sling and a smooth stone, and he went out and he knocked him out, cut his head off, killed him. That's David. He's the man who led Israel's armies to victory after victory in the service of King Saul. And after Saul turned against David and wanted to kill him, David fled into the wilderness to seek his life. But even there, David didn't wilt. He kept his head. He kept his faith. He kept going through the struggle. By the time he writes this psalm, life has turned. He's now the king of Israel. Again and again, he has tasted victory after victory on the field of battle. And yet, here he is, this warrior king, crying out to God. Now, I doubt that this meditation was made public at the time David wrote it. This is probably one of those published after death kind of things. But this is him, unfiltered, before God. And these words, my friends, they shatter the stereotype. Men, they shatter the stereotype that we ought always to be able to suck it up and handle all our own challenges by ourselves. David says, that's a lie. That's a lie. And so understand, these are a warrior's words. Second, we need to understand his location. Where is he writing from? Notice that when he cries out and says, God help me, he says he's writing from the ends of the earth. Now, there is nothing here in the inscription, no names of physical landmarks that would tell us that, yes, he is in a far country, although at times in his life he did. Even as a king, when his son Absalom fostered a rebellion against him, he had to flee the capital city and get away and go and hide until things were taken care of. So physically, maybe he was away from everything that was comfortable. But you know, that's not the only time that we can find ourselves at the ends of the earth, is it? Sometimes we find ourselves at the ends of the earth emotionally, spiritually. We can feel like we're 1,000 miles from home, 1,000 miles from peace, 1,000 miles from security. How do we get to the ends of the earth, emotionally speaking, spiritually speaking? Well, there's at least 3 routes. Let me talk about those 3 routes to the ends of the earth with you for just a moment, because maybe they'll ring a bell. Sometimes we find ourselves at the ends of the earth through life's random events. Things happen to us. A diagnosis. Something happens that we just couldn't see. An accident occurs. And suddenly life is turned upside down. And there we are. And we're the same person. Maybe we go to sleep in the same bed. We're wearing the same clothes. And we feel like that we were suddenly snatched out of where we ought to be. And we're someplace else. And we don't know where we're at. Up is down and down is up. Sometimes we find ourselves taken to the ends of the earth through the actions of other people, don't we? Someone we trusted let us down. And there we are. We're alone. We're devastated. We're broken. What are we going to do next? That can take us to where we physically, spiritually, we feel like that we don't know where anything is. All the landmarks we were counting on, they've been wiped out. There's a third route to the ends of the earth, emotionally speaking, and that can be through our own foolish and hard-headed actions. Like the old country song says, we feel like we're 10 feet tall and bulletproof. We can do whatever. We can go whatever. We can try whatever. We can chart a course without reference to God, and we did our own thing. We had a great time of it, and yet one day we wake up and we find that we emotionally, spiritually, we are a long way from home, and we don't know how to get back. That's the story of the prodigal son, isn't it? He took from the father his part, what he says is coming to me, and he cashed it in. He wasted it on living against everything his father stood for. And then when he found himself supposedly a good Jewish young man slopping hogs, he says, I've officially gotten to the bottom. How do I get back home? If you've ever gotten there, whether it's through just what seems like the random incidents of life, or the actions of others, or your own hard-headedness and rebellion, you can probably identify with David as he describes his condition. And he goes right to the center of things. He says, my heart grows faint. My heart, the center of my being, my very life feels like it's ebbing away. He's at the end of his emotional and spiritual rope. Joy and peace and confidence, they've all fled the scene. And this fellow who has once experienced so many victories, he's had the people singing songs that said Saul killed his thousands. David, he killed his 10,000s. And here he is, devastated, wiped out, faint of heart. But he still has one thing to lean on. One person, so to speak, to look to. And that is his confidence. The one thing, if you have this confidence, my friend, I don't care how far from home you feel like you are, you can hold on to this one thing. His confidence is this: God will once again lead him to the rock that is higher than I. Lead me to the rock. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. I love that imagery. One of the places that people like to get away to, where Lisa and I like to go more often than not on vacation, is somewhere in the mountains. The air is crisp and cool most of the time. The view is wonderful. But there's something else about just getting up above our normal altitude that refreshes and renews us. And David had even one more side of that. A high place was a secure place. It was above his enemies. He could look and he could see and he could watch their movements. So he naturally has this idea in mind as well. His confidence. God will lead me to the rock that is higher than myself. After all, verse 3 has such a wonderful thing, and this is his history with God. His history with God gave him confidence. God had helped him before. He says, you have been my refuge, a strong tower against the foe. We might read that and not think it's much of a thing at all, but when in his day, what a community would do was they would get together and they would go out and they would gather stones and they would bring them and they would construct a tower that they could go to and they could shut themselves up in when an enemy came against them. And they could go up, so they could send some up to the top of the tower. People get close to it. They could shoot them. Sometimes they pour boiling oil on them or something like that. It was pretty rough. You didn't want to attack a tower. His history with God told him that God had done it over and over again. And you can read David's story. It's found in 1 Samuel 16 all the way to the end of 2 Samuel. That is the life of David. And there's this pattern over and over. Trouble comes. David cries out for help, and then third, God delivers him. Sometimes it's pretty quick. Sometimes it's not quick enough. But it gets done. God delivers him. David had a history with God. Maybe you don't have a history with God, and that sort of says, well, I don't know that this really applies to me. But listen, the good news of new life through faith in Jesus is you can start a new history today. You can turn to Jesus as your Savior and Lord. Trust in Him with all your heart. Follow Him. And He's going to lead you. You can start a history with God. David not only has a history, he has a heritage. David says in verse 5 that God has given me the heritage of those who fear your name. It's sort of interesting that in all of this, David doesn't trot out what he has done for God. Don't we tend to do that? God, do you remember that time do you remember that check I wrote? We tend to trot out our accomplishments. But David, the fellow who could have done it all and said everything he's done, instead he reflects on God's promises to him. And not only to him, but to all who fear him. All who fear him. If you've listened to me preach any time at all, you know that when I read and I talk about it saying to fear God in the Old Testament, that is the Old Testament version of saying have faith in God. Have enough faith to trust Him. Have enough faith to follow Him. Have enough faith to change your life. That is what it means to fear God. Join in the heritage of those who fear God. Jesus urged His disciples, don't fear men who can destroy your body. He says, fear God, who can destroy both body and soul in Gehenna. And so David has a history with God. He has a heritage of faith. And so then he has hope. He has hope, a confidence that God will see him through. And so he writes, and it's a little different way of reading it because he's a king, and it sort of sounds, because he moves into the third person a little bit, it sounds a little different to our ears, but let's read it again. Increase the days of the king's life, his years for many generations. May he be enthroned in God's presence forever. Appoint your love and faithfulness to protect him. Then I will ever sing in praise of your name and fulfill my vows day after day. Even though David at this point in time finds himself at the ends of the earth, whether it's physically or emotionally, he has no doubt that God in his own time is going to appoint his love and faithfulness to protect him. How's it going to happen? Don't know. When is it going to come? That's above David's pay grade. But in due time, David is confident God's deliverance will come as it has many times before. You might remember these words of David in a similar situation. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. David doesn't know when. David doesn't know how. And yet he knows God's deliverance will come for him. And listen, it will come for you. Even if you find yourself at the ends of the earth, emotionally, spiritually, God won't let you go. Hold on to God's history of deliverance. He's done it over and over and over again. And he is true to his word. Rest in the heritage of God's people. Be a God-fearer. Believe in him enough to change your life and follow him. And then stand in hope. God's never going to let his children go. And that includes you.